Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another episode. My name is Dwyan, and a great happy new year to you guys. This is my first video for 2025. So I'm going to start with a very bold question. Who are Black Americans? And why does their history and lineage matter today? So in this video, I want to make a distinction, a very critical distinction between foundational Black Americans, or FBAs, and non-foundational Black Americans, non-FBAs. And I think that it's very critical to understand this distinction between the two groups in order to really understand the Black American experience, its identity, and its continual struggle for freedom and liberation. So with that, buckle in, let's get right into it and learn about the two types of Black Americans. Okay, so let's start with definitions. Who are foundational Black Americans and who are not foundational Black Americans? Okay, and I think the best thing to do is to actually go to the source of where the term foundational Black Americans comes from. So in this case, this is the official FBA.com website. I think that this is the authority on the definition of foundational Black American, and I think that we need to just go right to it and check it out. So who is a foundational Black American? Well, let's make this a little bigger. A foundational Black American is any person classified as Black who can trace their bloodline lineage back to the American system of slavery. Okay? To be designated as FBA, at least one parent, it doesn't have to be both parents, at least one parent must come from a non-immigrant background in the United States of America. And it also goes to show, if you go here, I do encourage people to go to the official FBA.com. I'll have a link in the description. So it says, how does a person trace their lineage, right? And according to officialfba.com, it's pretty straightforward, right? You have the 1870 census, you see fourth line down. The 1870 census provided the first detailed accounting of the Black population, right? Prior to 1870, we're into the period of slavery, and Blacks, as you know, were considered property, so they were not counted on the census. So 1870 is really your starting point, 5 years after the end of slavery, or at the end of the Civil War. So it says here, the 1870 census provides a detailed accounting of the Black population, and if a person can trace their lineage to the 1870 census, they are most likely a descendant of foundational Black Americans who were enslaved. And then it also says the 1900 census is good as well. It's a good verification source because there's more information that people had to give, such as race, citizenship, and birthplace, right? And the truth is, if you do speak to a lot of foundational Black Americans, they pretty much know their history, for the most part, but certainly if they're interested in finding out, they know it. And there is a process to claim this, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, how do we know who's the descendant of the slave? No, it's not true. You can't find it, and the census is a very good way of doing that. So that is a foundational Black American. I also wanted to point out the FBA flag, Foundation African American flag, as you can see right there. I'm not going to go into details, obviously, what all the symbolism on the flag means, but it's very interesting, and I do encourage, like I said, people to check out officialfba.com. But the 3 stars at the top is significant, and the 3 stars, as you can see, represents the 3 groups who make up the ethnic group that would become the foundational Black Americans. So you have, look at this, these are the 3 groups: the Black Aboriginal people of North America, the Black explorers and traders who had contact with the Americas before Columbus, and then the captives brought to the Western Hemisphere from Africa. That's obviously referring to the transatlantic slave trade. Now, when I was growing up as a kid, I thought all black people over here in the Western Hemisphere came over on slave ships, right? But in recent years, that has been really debunked. There are lots of material out there on this. That's for another video. I'm not going to get into it. But the point is, foundational Black Americans were here from the beginning of this country and even before America was created. And that's a very key, important thing. So I thought that was good. So yeah, so you can go check out FBA, officialfba.com to get some more information. Now, who are some of the FBAs, right? Let's give some examples of some of the FBAs. Well, as you can see, first of all, we should mention Tariq Nasheed. Tariq Nasheed is the person who came up with the term foundational Black Americans. And, you got to give a lot of kudos to him, Tariq Nasheed. He's an American filmmaker, a very successful filmmaker, a very successful YouTube influencer and personality, and a very well-respected member of the foundational Black American community. And then we have Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, some of you may remember him as the person who, next to Danny Glover back in, I think it was 2018 or 2019 at the HR 40 hearing on Congress. He was the one who presented the case for reparations, right? And Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's a very celebrated author, and he has definitely been one of the leading voices for reparations for foundational Black Americans. Then you have Yvette Carnell. Yvette Carnell also has an organization. Some of you may have heard of it, ADOS. This is the American Descendants of Slaves. This is the website here, adosfoundation.org. Again, I do encourage you to go there to learn about this. And again, same, just like official FBA, it is lineage-based reparations, right? Not just you don't qualify because you're Black. You have to have this lineage, and we're going to get to why that's important, in a few minutes. So let's just go back to some of these foundational Black Americans. So that's Yvette Carnell. She's the chairwoman of the ADOS Foundation, right? And then we have William Darity. William Darity is an American economist and author. He authored the book From Here to Equality, which is a very comprehensive production work piece that really provides the data and the economic framework for supporting reparations. Okay, so what about the non-FBAs, non-foundational Black Americans? Well, in order to understand this group of people, we have to look at immigration historically in the United States, right? So if we check out this graphic here, we can see that there's been three great waves of immigration to the United States, right? You have at the very bottom, that very first wave, which was pretty much exclusively North and Western Europeans. Then you had a second wave, which was also North and Western Europeans, but also you saw South and Eastern Europe. So it wasn't really until 1965, as you can see in the top graphic there, that you really start to see basically people of color, Blacks, being allowed to come into this country. So what happened in 1965? Why did this change happen? And to understand this, I want to play a very quick video. It's 1.5 minutes.
The 1965 Immigration Act has to be seen first and foremost as a civil rights measure. It was passed at that time when the U.S. Congress was passing a variety of civil rights laws. Of course, the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And those laws eliminated discrimination, racial discrimination, prohibited racial discrimination in public accommodations. And there was a feeling in Congress that that same notion of ending discrimination should also be applied to U.S. immigration policy. Up until 1965, U.S. immigration policy was heavily biased in favor of Europeans, and in particular Northern and Western Europeans. Tens of thousands of immigrant visas were reserved for Northern and Western Europeans, while Southern and Eastern Europeans, and especially Asians and Africans and Middle Easterners, had very little chance to immigrate to the United States. They were discriminated against on the basis of their national origins. And there was a feeling across the country and in Congress that it was time to end that discriminatory practice. So the 1965 Immigration Act abolished what had been this national origin quota system that had been in place for more than 40 years. People from all countries, nationalities had more or less an equal opportunity to immigrate to the United States. So it was a really landmark law in the history of U.S. immigration law.
Okay, so there you have it, right? So it was a landmark law in U.S. immigration history, right? And this is the event that happened basically in 1965 that created this really mass immigration into the United States, particularly in the case of Black Americans, particularly in the case of from the Caribbean, from Africa, and places where Africans reside, right, around the world. So non-foundational Black Americans, right? These are Black Americans whose parents and grandparents emigrated to the United States after 1965, right? Following the changes to the immigration laws, right? Okay. So unlike the FBAs, their history is rooted in immigration rather than the historical legacies of slavery and segregation, right? And this is a very key and important point. So me, for example, I am an example of a non-foundational Black American. I'm a Black American, but I was born here. I grew up here. This is my home. This is where I call home. I live here. I work here, all that stuff. But I'm not a foundational Black American because both my parents, one Jamaica, one Trinidad, came into this country, immigrated into this country in 1968, right? So, I am a non-FBA, and there's many non-FBAs in America, right? But again, the key to understand this is that this law changed really the face of this country, literally, and allowed all these different types of people that were not allowed before in order to come to this country. Now, let's give some examples of non-FBA, and we'll try and give some really famous examples, the most famous ones I can get, or the most important ones, let's say, right? So we can go to this. Non-FBAs, Barack Obama, the first quote-unquote Black president of the United States of America, right? The 44th president of the United States of America was non-FBA. Both his parents do not have lineage to foundational Black Americans, right? We know his father was Kenyan and his mother was basically white, a white American, okay? She's not related to foundational Black Americans. Then we have Kamala Harris, right? The current vice president, who's soon to be the ex-vice president of the United States, of course. And we know with Kamala Harris, she is of Jamaican and Indian heritage, right? Her parents immigrated into this country. Then we have Colin Powell, the former U.S. Secretary of State, as well as a general in the United States military. And both his parents, right? Both of them immigrated from Jamaica. Remember, non-FBAs, both your parents, right? And then Byron Donalds, right? Byron Donalds is the current U.S. representative for Florida's 19th congressional district. And he is of Jamaican and Panamanian heritage. So those are some of your non-FBAs. So it's quite interesting, when I look at these individuals, just think about it, right? The president, that's the highest office in the land. The vice president, probably the second or third highest office in the land. Colin Powell, a general in the Army plus U.S. Secretary of State, right? So basically what you see here is that non-FBAs have actually risen farther and further and gone further than FBAs, than the people who've been here for hundreds of years longer than these people, right? Which is very interesting, right? No FBA, no foundational Black American has been U.S. Secretary of State. No foundational Black American has been vice president. No foundational Black American has been president. So it's very, very interesting. Okay, so we've defined FBA and non-FBA. You guys must have a very good understanding of that right now. But the question now, or the next thing that might be interesting, is what percentage of the Black community is FBA and non-FBA? Do we know? Well, according to Pew Research, right, they estimate, again in 2019, this is 2019 numbers, so it's a little bit old, but it's still pretty good. It gives us a good indication. It says that 21% of Black Americans are either immigrants or first-generation Americans. Again, according to Pew Research, right? So this is very interesting. I mean, that's 1 in 5. And you can see that back in 1980, that number was only 3. And remember the act, the 1965 Act was 15 years before 1980. So you can see that really the immigrant population of America really started happening in the 2000s. I don't want to say the 2000s, but it really started happening sort of like after 1980 up to 2019 is when you really start to see this increase. And I would argue that if you include the grandchildren of immigrants, right, it might be, this number might be a little bit higher, but it's still very interesting. 1 in 5 Black Americans today are non-FBA. That is, both parents are immigrants. So that's interesting. Now, what is also interesting is what I call mixed FBAs, or mixed or dual ancestry, right? Those are the Black Americans who have both. They have foundational Black American in one parent, and then they have immigrant in another parent, right? And I think that's also very interesting. What are some examples of mixed FBAs? Well, Sasha and Malia Obama. Remember, Barack is a non-FBA, but he married an FBA in Michelle Obama. So therefore, Sasha and Malia Obama, right, they are considered FBAs, right? But in this particular slide, I say mixed FBAs because they have the two, right? Meghan Markle is an FBA, ladies and gentlemen, right? And that's through her mother, of course. Doria Ragland, I believe is her name, who is an FBA, right? So Meghan Markle is an FBA. She is a foundational Black American because she has that blood. Then we have Coleman Hughes. Coleman Hughes is a writer, and he, if you remember, was back in HR 40, 2019, at the hearing at the House. He was the gentleman, together with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, as I mentioned before, he actually gave the argument for reparations. Well, guess what? Coleman Hughes gave the argument against reparations, right? So here's an example of a foundational Black American, right? Even though he's dual ancestry, this is an example of a foundational Black American who is opposed to reparations. And we'll see in a minute some other foundational Black Americans who are opposed to reparations. And then, of course, we have the Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X is also mixed lineage, combining both his FBA roots with his Caribbean ancestry, right? I believe his mother was Caribbean and his father was FBA. Now let's talk a little bit about reparations. Now, this is not a topic per se that I'm going to get into on a deep level. No, I'm just using it as an example to show how non-FBA and FBA think differently when it comes to a lot of things, but in particular reparations. I'm just going to use reparations as an example for that. So first of all, let's look at reparations support in the United States of America. And as you can see, again, according to Pew Research, roughly about 77% of Black Americans, right, support reparations, okay? Whereas you can see in other groups, there's overwhelmingly lack of support for reparations. You can see that in the yellow column there, right? And if you go through almost every single category, age, political affiliation, high school versus college versus bachelor plus, income levels, you can see that by and large, Americans overwhelmingly do not support reparations on any level. But you can see there, when it comes to Black people, there's a completely different story. Black people support reparations 77%. Why is this important? Well, I showed you earlier that 1 in 5, approximately 20% of Black Americans are non-FBA, which means that the majority of Black Americans are basically FBA, right? So when you look at when you look at these statistics and the 77 jumps out at you, Black people support reparations, everyone else doesn't, you got to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why do Black people support reparations? Well, I would say to you that given the fact that the majority of Black Americans are foundational Black Americans, I would submit to you that foundational Black Americans, because they carry with them that blood, they carry with them that history of slavery, segregation, sharecropping, Jim Crow, terrorism against them, blah, 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 redlining, go down the list. That history is in their bloods. And I would argue that after 1865, when foundational Black Americans, by the way, were on the winning side of the Civil War, guess what happened? Lincoln got assassinated. Johnson came into power, became the president. And then what did he do? He took away the land that Blacks had fought for during the Civil War, took away their lands. So after the Civil War, it was a betrayal. And I would argue that, we all know about the 40 acres and the mule. And I would argue that basically since that betrayal and the many betrayals that have happened continuously since then, Black Americans have always been supporters, foundational Black Americans have always been supporters of reparations because they know that no restitution was made. No repair was made for the damage that was done. And it's been a constant struggle for this liberation and this freedom and this fairness and justice in the foundational Black American community. And this is why they continue to support reparations even up to 2024. In fact, I would argue that in the Black community, there's even more support of reparations than there was, say, 20 years ago, like at the turn of the century, So, and you probably would expect it to go down as the generations come forward and stuff like that. But no, this is something that foundational Black Americans in particular carry in their blood. So this is very, very important. So again, let me just reiterate it. For foundational Black Americans, reparations is not just symbolic. Okay? They address social injustices, historical injustices, systematic exclusion, and of course, generational economic harm, okay, caused by all the things I listed: slavery, segregation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so reparations for foundational Black Americans represents repair, restitution, justice. So the question now becomes then, how do non-foundational Black Americans view reparations? Okay. Now, I am a non-foundational Black American, and as you know, you've been watching my channel, and certainly you can get from what I've been saying so far that I support reparations 100%, specifically lineage-based reparations for descendants of foundational Black Americans, and I am not entitled to reparations. Okay, because I am a non-FBA, right? My parents were immigrants from another country. So, but yet I support it 100%. So I may be maybe one of the few, because my argument here is this. My argument is that I believe that the reason, as I've stated, the reason why 77% of Black Americans support reparations is because the overwhelming majority of Black Americans are foundational Black Americans. Okay? And for the reasons I've already explained. But however, I think that some of the big voices who have been against reparations, believe it or not, are not necessarily non-FBAs. In other words, you know, I'm not saying that every single foundational Black American supports reparations, because that's definitely not the case. Let's take a look at some who don't. These are foundational Black Americans who do not support reparations. Larry Elder is, I didn't get his full biography, but Larry Elder is basically a conservative. He's run for, I believe, governor for California. He has a very well respected talk show host, as well as a YouTube influencer. Larry Elder really has an impeccable resume. Then you have Glenn Loury. Glenn Loury's an economist. You know, he also has a show on YouTube that he does, and you know, he talks about some of these things. We've talked about Coleman Hughes already. He, of course, is an FBA, but he does not support reparations, and he's come out very publicly against it. And then, of course, we have Candace Owens. And Candace Owens is someone else who does not support reparations, but these are all FBAs. So it's not as if every single FBA supports reparations. I'm just arguing that the overwhelming majority of them do. And that's the only way I can see it. Now, what's interesting is how many non-FBAs support reparations. So I was looking online, and I only came up with one person, right? So I believe there are many non-FBAs that support reparations, by the way, right? I've already pointed out I'm one of them, but I'm looking for people in the public eye who are known, but also they've come out publicly to support reparations, right? And I could only find Ayo Tameti, right? She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and she is the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, right? I couldn't find anyone else, really. And this kind of proves my point that non-FBAs, I don't think reparations is a priority. Now, in this case, Ayo Tameti, she's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. If you know how Black Lives Matter came to being, so she's a freedom fighter. She obviously identifies with the foundational Black American struggle, right? And it's not as if non-FBAs have not faced racial discrimination as well and all that type of thing. So she's very much aware of that. But really, I just don't see non-FBAs really in support of reparations. I mean, if we look at, let's just go back here to reparations. If we go back to the non-FBAs, right? Byron Douglas does not support reparations, right? I don't know where Colin Powell stands on it, because I've actually looked at some videos to try to see if there's anything on YouTube, but I don't get it, and he certainly hasn't advocated for it, right? Byron Donalds on the Breakfast Club has come outright and said he doesn't support it. Kamala Harris does not support doing anything for Black people, right? Even though she acknowledges the stuff that Black people have gone through, she would not come up with a specific policy for Black people, which is what reparations is. Barack Obama, as we know, another non-FBA, he's pretty much downplayed reparations. It's not something that is high on his priority list, and it certainly wasn't when he was president of the United States of America. And this is the point that I'm trying to make, folks, that there's exceptions to every rule, but I feel that in the Black community, it's really a non-FBA is not focused on reparations, or it's not something, because they don't have that lineage. They just came in the 1960s, so their focus and their outlook is more on is rooted in immigration. It's rooted in coming to America, the land of opportunity, and they're coming in with their culture intact for the most part. It's different. They don't have that historical baggage, if you will, So this is why I think it's very difficult to see non-FBAs come out in support of reparations. You're more likely to see them come out against reparations. Okay, let's wrap this up. I actually gone for a lot longer than I wanted to go to, but we have to have the conclusion here. So the first thing I want to say is that there's been a lot of backlash in America over the last few years against DEI, affirmative action, and some of these other race-based policies that the government or institutions want to put forward, right? So this is one that happened in 2023, and this was a big one. U.S. Supreme Court rejects affirmative action in university admissions, right? The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday struck down race-conscious admissions programs at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, effectively prohibiting affirmative action policies long used to raise the number of Black, Hispanic, and other underrepresented minority students. In a blockbuster decision that will force many colleges and universities to overhaul their admissions policies, the justices ruled that affirmative action admissions programs that consider an applicant's race in ways like Harvard and UNC did violate the U.S. Constitution's promise of equal protection under the law. So this is very important in this whole issue of reparations, because it's going to be very difficult for Blacks who overwhelmingly support reparations to push a reparations agenda that is based solely on race. Hence, it's important to have this lineage-based approach, which is why I am doing this video and why I am emphasizing the importance of distinguishing between these two particular groups of Americans, FBAs and non-FBAs, because now you don't get reparations simply because you have Black skin or you're Black or whatever, or you're classified as Black. You have to show receipts. You have to show a lineage to the very people who were enslaved. Okay, so I'm showing this to show you the backlash against it, but reparations now in 2024 is not based on race. It is based on lineage. Okay? So that's the important point. Why I think reparations has picked up momentum in the 2000s, right? It was dying a little bit and it sort of like picked it back up again. And it really has now, I think, a strong case. We have examples. I'm going to do many videos on reparations. It's something that I do care deeply about and I'm very interested in, but this is not that video right now. Okay? And in case you're wondering, this is the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. And this is an excerpt from it. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor, here's the key, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws, right? So by having these affirmative action, DEI policies that, you know, this person is going to get something because of their race or ethnicity or origin, whatever, this is being fought tooth and nail because it goes against, as you can see, the Constitution, right? And I know that the Supreme Court is more conservative bent now, so people will say, oh, well, we have to get rid of the conservative judges and then we can get it back. But the point is, this is the context today in 2024, 2025, I should say. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I think that as a non-FBA myself, I think it's very important for non-foundational Black Americans to really support foundational Black Americans. We should be concerned with the plight of foundational Black Americans, because remember in the video I played earlier, the 1965 immigration law, remember what the guy said? It should be considered a civil rights, a part of the civil rights package and movement, right? To end not only discrimination within the United States, but also to end discrimination within the immigration policy of the United States of America, right? I hope that point is clear. And the reason why I bring that up is to say this. Black, African, Caribbean, people of color, immigrants coming into this country and who have really come into this country in droves, right? And who have found opportunities and bettered themselves and all that type of stuff. But you come on the backs of the people who actually paved the way and provided the opportunity for you to come in, which is Blacks. Because remember, prior to 1965, you couldn't come in. Blacks were fighting for civil rights and discrimination law, anti-discrimination laws all across the board. So us non-foundational Black Americans, we should be, thanking foundational Black Americans, particularly those of us who have come to America and done and made things wonderful for ourselves. We should honor them. We should be concerned with their struggle, right? We must educate ourselves about that history, because if you call yourself a Black American, then you need to know the history. Okay. And again, reparations are about it's not a handout. Reparations are about justice. It's about a debt that is owed to a specific group of people based on lineage. And that's very important. So I don't want to, I could probably talk about this for hours, but I think I've said my piece. If you found this video interesting, please do leave a comment. I'd love to hear comments and your takes on it. Please subscribe, like, share, all the good stuff. I appreciate it very much. Once again, Happy New Year, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace and love.